My name's John Harrison. I'm a fellow of 1988, and I was fortunate to travel to 6 European member states: France, Italy, Germany, Belgium and Denmark. And the primary aim of my fellowship was to compare how those member states were implementing environmental legislation. My current role is one of a manager within Natural Resources Wales, which is a recently created organisation that brought together the former organisations of the Environment Agency, Forestry Commission and the Countryside Council for Wales to take an even more integrated approach to the environment, and that remains our greatest challenge. In my early days as an operational regulatory officer, I found the fellowship very relevant in being able to broaden my horizons, to really be able to sort of challenge some of the thinking at the time. Because in the late 80s, the UK was often labelled the dirty man of Europe when it came to air pollution, and because we were seen to be behind many other European countries. And the Churchill Fellowship gave me an insight into what that actually meant. Yes, there were things that were perhaps being done by other European countries that we weren't adopted yet, but at the same time, I think our level of regulation was far more rigorous than perhaps people were led to believe. And then as my career developed over the years in regulation, beyond air pollution into other forms of regulation, and trying to develop an integrated approach to regulation of the environment, I found it increasingly important to be able to reflect back on my fellowship and maintain in the early years some of the contacts I had with some of those countries that I visited. But I think one of the abiding lessons I keep reflecting on in my fellowship is the ability to step back and understand that the world is a large place. We don't always have all the answers, and even when we are offering advice to people from developing countries, we can often find there's as much to learn from them as we can impart in their information. Soon after my fellowship returned, I was invited to speak at the World Clean Air Conference in 1989 in The Hague, in the Netherlands, and on the back of that and a publication that occurred, I was clearly in demand within my profession to share my experiences. So although I didn't seek it, the fellowship, travelling and the subsequent presentations at a prestigious event really enabled me to go from an operational officer into an officer that could talk about things at a national and international level. Well, I've been fairly diligent in following the advice from our previous Director Generals. I can remember one or two I've met over the years who were sort of saying, well, who have you encouraged to apply personally? And I think each year I have had at least one fellow apply in, and not always with great success. So since 1988, I think approximately about half a dozen fellows who have been successful have come as a result of my personal encouragement. And I've tried to ensure that in my working life and social life, I try to identify individuals who I know will make good applicants. My advice to anybody applying for a Churchill Fellowship would probably be to try and speak to a fellow who has gone through the process, probably somebody who has done it recently. And the best way to do that is to use the association contacts that are on the website, who can provide that sort of support to talk you through the process. Even though it's well laid out on the website, I find you can't beat that personal conversation with somebody to say, well, what happens? How is it going to play out in practice? Because some people are naturally nervous in talking about their particular fellowships, but the trust understand that and they take that into account. The second, clearly now with the age of more information available on the website, is look at the stories of what's happened to previous fellows in your topic area, because that can set out what they've learned in their lessons, and you might then be able to use that as a roadmap for their own applications. Churchill's relevance to me in today's society, I believe, is even more important as we understand how the world is of a far more diverse place than perhaps we would have thought. But at the same time, when you look at the historical setting, you can understand why he is more relevant. The ability for me is to learn from your mistakes, and he was not in any way undeterred by his mistakes. And we often hear the 80-20 principle made in life, but I'm sure Churchill worked on the 60-40 principle, because he made perhaps more mistakes than most, but he was such an energetic individual, he did more than most. So for me, I think that's the greatest lesson for Churchill to apply to people, regardless of all his different characteristics, is never stop trying.